November 27th, 2020. Absard, Iran. 2:30 p.m. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was driving home for the weekend. His wife was in the passenger seat. His security detail followed in vehicles behind and ahead. Standard protocol for a man of his importance. It was Friday. Jumu'ah, the holy day. He'd spent the morning at his villa outside Tehran, going through papers, making calls. Now he was heading to the family compound near Absard. The weekend stretched ahead. 2 days of relative peace. Time with family. Time away from the laboratory. Time to think about things other than uranium enrichment and nuclear physics. He was 62 years old, tired, ready for retirement, though he'd never say it publicly. The work was important. Iran needed him. But he'd been doing this for decades, carrying secrets, living with security, always looking over his shoulder. Maybe in a few years, maybe he could step back, train someone younger, let them carry the burden. That's what he was thinking about when the Nissan pickup truck exploded. Not the explosion that would kill him. That came seconds later. But the explosion that was meant to stop his convoy, to create confusion, to position him for the kill. In those seconds between the first explosion and the bullets that would end his life, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh had no idea he was already dead. He was just a man driving home on a Friday afternoon, thinking about retirement, about his wife, about the weekend. Just a man. This is the story of his last ordinary Friday. Not the story of Israel's most sophisticated assassination, not the story of Iran's nuclear program, but the story of a scientist who woke up thinking he had years ahead of him and had only hours. Everyone knows how his story ends. Nobody tells you how his last morning began. Until now. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh woke at 5:47 a.m. on Friday, November 27th, 2020. Early, as always. His body clock had been set by decades of discipline. Military training in his youth. Years of running a classified nuclear program. The habits of a lifetime don't change just because it's Friday. His wife, Hediya, was still sleeping. He moved quietly, trying not to wake her. Small courtesy after 40 years of marriage. The villa outside Tehran was comfortable, not opulent. He wasn't that kind of man, but comfortable. Books everywhere, technical journals stacked on tables. A life spent in pursuit of knowledge visible in every room. He went to the bathroom, looked at himself in the mirror. 62 years old, looked back at him. Gray beard, neatly trimmed, deep lines around his eyes, the weight of carrying state secrets visible in his face. Who was this man in the mirror? To the world. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, head of Iran's nuclear program. The father of Iran's bomb, as Western intelligence called him. Target, enemy, threat. To himself, a physicist, a professor, a man who dedicated his life to science, to Iran, to the belief that his country deserved the same capabilities as other nations. Both versions were true. Both existed in the same body. He performed his ablutions. Ritual washing before Fajr prayer, hands, face, arms, feet. The movements automatic after a lifetime of practice, 5 times a day, every day, for 62 years. Some things are constant. He spread his prayer mat facing Mecca, stood, raised his hands to his ears. Allahu Akbar. God is great. The Fajr prayer. The first of 5 daily prayers. The words flowed naturally. His mind was focused and wandering simultaneously, focused on the prayer, wandering to the work waiting for him, the calculations, the reports, the endless pressure. Iran's nuclear program was his life's work. Decades of research, of training scientists, of building infrastructure, of navigating sanctions and sabotage and international pressure. It was important work, essential work. His country needed nuclear capability for energy, for medicine, for deterrence, for pride. That's what he told himself. That's what he believed. He finished the prayer, sat back on his heels. The morning light was starting to filter through the windows. Tehran was waking up. He had meetings today, papers to review. Then the drive to the family compound. A weekend with family, just another Friday, like thousands before it, except it wasn't. Because 200 miles away, in a small building near Absard, a robotic weapons system was already positioned. Loaded, armed, waiting, controlled by satellite from somewhere far away. Israel, probably, though Iran would never prove it, though no one would claim responsibility. The weapon had been smuggled into Iran weeks ago, piece by piece, assembled in secret, positioned on the route Fakhrizadeh took every weekend. Artificial intelligence targeting systems had been programmed with his facial recognition data. The weapon would fire only when it identified him, only when conditions were perfect. No collateral damage, precision. All of this had been planned for months, maybe years, and Mohsen Fakhrizadeh had no idea. He went to the kitchen, made tea, strong black tea the way he'd learned to drink it as a young man. The kettle whistled. He poured, added 1 sugar cube, sat at the table. Through the window, he could see his security detail changing shifts. 2 men leaving, 2 arriving. They'd been with him for years, professionals, dedicated, but tired, like him. Living under threat for decades wears on everyone. The constant vigilance. The knowledge that somewhere, someone is planning, watching, waiting. Fakhrizadeh had survived multiple assassination attempts, car bombs, poisoning attempts. Each time security adapted, each time protocols improved. He was careful, varied his routes, changed his schedule, trusted few people, lived like a man who knew he was hunted. And yet he also had to live, had to see family, had to go to work, had to move through the world like a human being, not just a target. That balance between security and life was exhausting. And on this Friday morning, drinking his tea, looking at the sunrise, he was tired of it. Maybe retirement wasn't years away. Maybe it was months, maybe next spring. Maybe he could finally step back, travel, spend time with grandchildren, read books that weren't about nuclear physics. Maybe. His wife came into the kitchen at 6:45 a.m. She looked tired too. The worry of being married to a man who was perpetually hunted showed in her face. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning. Tea?" "Please." They sat together. Comfortable silence. The companionship of decades. No need to fill every moment with words. "Are we going to Absard today?" she asked. "Yes. After my meetings. We'll leave around 2. "The children are coming tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, yes. Saturday afternoon." Their children, their grandchildren, family gathering for the weekend, normal life, the kind of ordinary happiness that everyone wants. For a moment, Fakhrizadeh felt content, peaceful. This was good. This was what mattered. Not the work, not the program, not the secrets. Just tea with his wife, planning a weekend with family, simple, human. If he could freeze this moment, live here forever. No pressure, no threat, no burden. But moments don't freeze, time doesn't stop. And at 2:30 p.m. this afternoon, his time would run out. He finished his tea, stood. "I should get ready. The meeting is at 9. She nodded, touched his hand briefly. "Be careful. Always." He'd said those words 1,000 times. Be careful. Always. A ritual exchange. A prayer disguised as conversation. He showered, dressed, conservative suit, white shirt, tie. The uniform of a senior official. A man of authority and responsibility. He looked at himself in the mirror again. Straightened his tie. Smoothed his jacket. Professional. Respectable. Ready for the day. He had no idea this was the last time he'd dress himself. The last time he'd tie this tie. The last time he'd look at his reflection and see a man with a future. At 8:15 a.m., he left the villa. His security detail was waiting. 2 vehicles, armed men, Standard protocol. The drive to his office took 40 minutes. Tehran traffic. Even on Friday morning, the city was busy. Fakhrizadeh sat in the back seat, reviewed papers, made notes. His mind was on the meeting, on the technical challenges facing the program, on the questions he needed to answer. Not on danger, not on threats, just on work. Because if you spend every moment thinking about threats, you can't function, you can't work, you can't live. So you build routines. You trust your security. You focus on what you can control. And you accept that some risks are unavoidable. That's how he'd lived for 20 years. And it had worked. He was still alive, still working, still contributing. No reason to think today would be different. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Technical briefings, progress reports, challenges and solutions, the intricate dance of running a clandestine nuclear program under international sanctions. Fakhrizadeh asked sharp questions, pushed his team, demanded excellence. This was his reputation. Brilliant, demanding, uncompromising, but also fair. He remembered what it was like to be a young scientist. He mentored, he taught. He built a program that would outlast him. At least, that's what he thought. That the program would outlast him. That he was building something permanent. He didn't know that within months of his death, the program would face its worst sabotage. That his absence would create gaps that would take years to fill. He couldn't know that. So he planned for the future. For succession. For continuity. The meeting ended at 12:30 p.m. He had lunch in his office. Simple food, rice, vegetables. He wasn't particular about meals. Food was fuel. Work was what mattered. He made phone calls, reviewed more papers, sent emails on secure channels. At 1:45 p.m., he gathered his things. Time to go. The weekend was waiting. He said goodbye to his staff. "See you Sunday." They nodded. "Enjoy your weekend, sir." Normal pleasantries. Normal Friday departures. Everyone going home. Everyone looking forward to 2 days of rest. No one knew. No one suspected. The drive to Absard would take about an hour. Maybe a bit more depending on traffic leaving Tehran. Fakhrizadeh got into the car. His wife was waiting. She'd spent the day preparing, packing things for the weekend, food, clothes, gifts for the grandchildren. The security detail fell into formation. One vehicle ahead, one behind. Standard pattern. They left Tehran at 2:05 p.m. The road to Absard was familiar. Fakhrizadeh had driven it hundreds of times. Thousands, maybe. Every weekend for years. He knew every turn, every landmark, every village along the way. In summer, the landscape was beautiful. Mountains, green valleys, a break from Tehran's urban sprawl. In late November, it was colder, gray, but still peaceful, still a respite. They drove in silence for a while. His wife dozed. He looked out the window, thought about nothing in particular, just the pleasant emptiness of a mind at rest. His phone buzzed. A message, work-related. He read it, replied briefly, then put the phone away. No work this weekend, he'd promised himself. Time with family. That's what mattered now. At 2:27 p.m., they were 3 minutes from the kill zone. The Nissan pickup truck was parked on the side of the road. It looked abandoned, broken down maybe, nothing suspicious. Inside the truck bed, hidden under a tarp, was the weapon. A robotic machine gun, sophisticated, precise, controlled remotely via satellite. The artificial intelligence targeting system had been tracking Fakhrizadeh's convoy since it left Tehran. Facial recognition confirmed his identity. The system calculated trajectory, wind speed, distance, optimal firing solution, all automated, all precise, all invisible. At 2:28 p.m., Fakhrizadeh's convoy approached the truck. The lead security vehicle passed it without incident. At 2:29 p.m., Fakhrizadeh's car drew level with the truck. The AI confirmed target identification. Calculated 97% probability of successful engagement. Received final authorization from the remote operator. At 2:30 p.m., the weapon fired. But first, the Nissan exploded. A decoy, a distraction. The security detail immediately focused on the burning truck. Threat, ambush, protocol, protect the principal. Fakhrizadeh's driver hit the brakes. Standard response. The car stopped, and that's what the weapon needed. A stationary target, 13 shots, fired in rapid succession through the windshield, through bulletproof glass that wasn't quite bulletproof enough. 11 missed, 2 hit. Both struck Fakhrizadeh, shoulder, spine. He didn't understand what was happening. One moment driving, the next pain, confusion, his wife screaming. The security detail swarmed the car, pulled him out. He was bleeding, badly. They tried to stop it. Applied pressure, called for help. A helicopter was dispatched. Medical team mobilized, but they were too far from Tehran, too far from the hospital. Fakhrizadeh was conscious, in shock, but conscious. He knew he'd been shot, knew it was bad. His wife held his hand. "Stay with me. Stay with me." He tried to speak, couldn't. The pain was overwhelming. He thought about his children, his grandchildren, the weekend that wouldn't happen, the retirement he'd been planning. He thought about the work, the program, 20 years of his life. Would it continue? Would someone else carry it forward? He thought about the morning, tea with his wife, the sunrise, the prayer, the ordinary moment that had been his last peaceful moment. He didn't think about who had done this, or why, or how. He just thought, I'm not ready. I'm not done. I need more time. But time was the one thing he didn't have. The helicopter arrived 23 minutes later. Too long. Far too long. They loaded him in. Medics worked frantically. But the damage was too severe. The blood loss too great. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh died in the helicopter at 3:17 p.m., 47 minutes after he'd been shot. 90 minutes after he'd left Tehran thinking about a quiet weekend with family. 6.5 hours after he'd woken up thinking he had years ahead of him. His wife was with him when he died, holding his hand, telling him she loved him, saying prayers. He was 62 years old, a scientist, a husband, a father, a grandfather. A man who dedicated his life to his country and his work. And now he was gone. The news broke within hours. Iranian media reported it first. Martyrdom of prominent nuclear scientist. Western media picked it up. Iran's top nuclear scientist assassinated. Israel didn't claim responsibility. They never do, but everyone knew. The sophistication of the operation, the precision, the intelligence required. Only one country had the capability and the motivation. Iran vowed revenge, promised retaliation, swore the program would continue. The funeral was massive. Thousands of mourners, senior officials, military leaders, his students, his colleagues, his wife, his children, his grandchildren. They buried him as a martyr, as a hero of the Islamic Republic, as a man who'd given his life for his country. And all of that was true. To Iran, he was those things. But to himself, in his last conscious moments, he was just a man who'd wanted more time, more mornings drinking tea, more weekends with family, more ordinary Fridays. Just a man who never saw them coming. The operation was hailed as a triumph of intelligence and technology. A bloodless assassination. No operatives at risk, no collateral damage, just the target, eliminated with surgical precision. Perfect execution. But perfection in execution doesn't mean perfection in outcome. Iran's nuclear program didn't stop. It accelerated. They replaced Fakhrizadeh. They hardened security. They moved facilities deeper underground. The assassination created a martyr, created anger, created motivation to prove they couldn't be stopped, and it created a precedent. Remote assassination, AI-targeted weapons, the future of killing, demonstrated on an Iranian road. Is that progress? Is that success? Is that making anyone safer? Depends on your perspective, Depends on your time horizon. Depends on what you think success means. In the short term, target eliminated, threat reduced, capability demonstrated. In the long term, program continues. New leaders emerge, technology proliferates. Same pattern, same cycle, same question. Did it work? Mohsen Fakhrizadeh had a life before he became a target. He was a student once, a young physicist fascinated by atoms and energy, a teacher who loved explaining complex concepts, a husband who'd built a life with his wife over 40 years. He had hobbies, he collected books, he liked poetry, he followed football. He had a favorite tea shop in Tehran where he'd go sometimes, just to sit and think. He had a morning routine, prayer, tea, reading, the small rituals that make us human. He had dreams, plans, things he wanted to do when he retired, places he wanted to travel, time he wanted to spend. All of that ended on a road near Absard on a Friday afternoon. Not because of anything he did that day. He hadn't made a mistake, hadn't let his guard down, hadn't been careless. He'd just been living, going home for the weekend, following his routine, and that was enough. Enough for the weapon to find him, enough for the AI to identify him, enough for the trigger to be pulled. His crime, from Israel's perspective, was his knowledge, his expertise, his role in Iran's nuclear program. From Iran's perspective, his work was patriotic, essential, defensive. Both sides were certain they were right. Both sides justified their actions. Both sides would point to the other and say, "They started it. They left us no choice. They're the threat," and both sides would be partially right and partially wrong, because this conflict, like most conflicts, doesn't have clear heroes and villains. Just people making decisions based on their understanding of security and threat and necessity. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh believed he was serving his country, building deterrence, ensuring Iran's security. Israel believed he was building weapons, creating an existential threat, needing to be stopped. Neither belief changes what happened on that Friday. A man drove home, a weapon fired, a life ended. The morning routine he'd performed for 62 years, done for the last time. The tea he'd drunk, his last cup, the goodbye he'd said to his staff. "See you Sunday?" He wouldn't. The promise to his wife, "Be careful." Always. He'd tried. These small moments, these ordinary fragments of a Friday, these are what we lose when we reduce people to targets. We forget the morning prayer, the breakfast tea, the comfortable silence with a wife of 40 years, the plans for the weekend, the dreams of retirement. We remember the program, the threat, the operation, the success. We forget the man. And that forgetting is easy, necessary even for the operation to happen. You can't humanize your target, can't think about their routines, their families, their dreams. You have to reduce them to a role, to a threat, to a target. Otherwise, how do you pull the trigger? But after the operation, after the success, after the headlines fade, the human details remain. Somewhere, Fakhrizadeh's wife wakes up every morning to an empty space in the bed, to tea for one instead of two, to silence instead of companionship. Somewhere, his children tell stories about their father, about the scientist, about the man who taught them, about ordinary Fridays that are gone forever. Somewhere, his grandchildren are growing up without him, without his knowledge, without his presence, without knowing who he was beyond the headlines. These losses aren't strategic, aren't tactical, aren't measurable in any way that matters to national security, but they're real, they're permanent. They're the human cost that doesn't appear in operational assessments. Every operation has more than one story. Most channels tell you about the brilliance of the technology, the precision of the strike, the sophistication of the intelligence. We tell you about the man drinking tea on his last Friday morning, about the ordinary moments that preceded the extraordinary violence, about the life that existed before it became a target, not to justify what he did, not to minimize the threat he might have posed, not to question the operation's necessity, but to remember. He was a person. He had a morning routine. He looked forward to weekends. He planned for retirement. He thought he had more time. Just like everyone. Just like you. Just like anyone who wakes up on an ordinary Friday thinking it's just another day, until it isn't. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh woke up at 5:47 a.m. on November 27, 2020. He performed his ablutions, said his prayers, drank his tea, went to work, left for the weekend, an ordinary Friday, like thousands before it. Except it was his last, and he never saw them coming. If you want more perspectives they don't show, the human moments before the operations, the ordinary days before the extraordinary violence, subscribe. Because every target had a morning routine. Every operation interrupted a life. Every success created a loss. Understanding all perspectives doesn't mean justifying actions. It means seeing the complete picture. And the complete picture includes the scientist drinking tea on his last Friday morning, thinking about retirement, planning for the weekend, never suspecting that the weekend would never come. That's not the story of Israel's most sophisticated assassination. That's the story of a man who never saw them coming. Because sometimes, that's all you can say. That's the only truth that matters in that moment. He never saw them coming, and then he was gone.